Salutations to our fine podcast audience. Welcome to 3 Peas in a Pod, episode 259.
We made it.
We made it 2 weeks in a row.
We did.
And I have not forgotten your promise, Nathan. You said you had something that you wanted to say for this podcast.
Yes, so
the floor is yours, sir.
Often this time of the year, we're talking about the Braves. And I normally have nothing to contribute to that conversation because my wife has been always very just anti-watching baseball. I've not necessarily been anti it. I've just not been, we necessarily need to watch it. So I don't ever watch it. But this year, my wife was like, hey, in addition to watching the Hawks, and because the Hawks are not doing great, she said, why don't we start watching?
Hawks are doing what they always do. They're mediocre.
I'll tell you this right now. Hawks are doing better than Braves right now. So we started watching the Braves. I was
going to say, did y'all mess that up?
Well, that's her theory. She said, we brought the curse of the Hawks. And I said, right now, I'll just tell you this. The Hawks are always right at 500. And
Braves are struggling to get there.
It's a difference between two sports.
Oh, I get that.
Everybody, if you talk about baseball, everybody who plays baseball every year, this is what you should tell Jennifer. Everybody going into that season is losing 52 games or more. Everybody's winning 52 games or more. The whole thing is determined by the other 52. When we had an 0-for-7 losing streak to start the season, people were like, well, nobody's ever come back. But then quickly, a whole bunch of people go, but a lot of people who won the World Series had 7-game losing streaks at some point during the season. At some point in the season. It just happened to be the first 7 games of the season. The Braves are still a really good, talented team. They are frustrating. Like most, if you're a fan of a sport, of a talented team, and you watch every game, those games will frustrate you. You know, if they win 90 games, that means 70 games I'm going to be frustrated.
Yep.
Sure.
And 90 games is a dang good season.
You're definitely going to the playoffs. The year they won the World Series a few years ago, they won 86.
That's right.
They were not the best team. They're not the best Braves team I've ever watched.
We'll be all right.
Yeah.
We'll be.
But thanks for jumping on the train.
We're watching the Braves this year.
Yeah, last night he texted me telling me that he had watched the ESPN broadcast, and I wanted to say, well, that was a mistake.
Yes.
Because ESPN hates baseball, but they have a contract to do, and they regularly just talk about things that are not baseball in the middle of baseball.
It was a good game itself, but the coverage was pretty terrible.
Yeah, I will not listen to ESPN broadcast a baseball game.
Speaking of baseball, you made me think of this. I just watched this last night. Did you know that 60 Minutes did a story on Banana Ball?
Oh, really? No, I didn't know that.
It was excellent. If you care about Banana Ball.
It's a whole different way.
I love
doing baseball, but with baseball items.
Yes.
Baseball players and baseball items, not playing baseball.
It was excellent. I thought they did a great job. And I love what they're doing.
I do too. Yeah, they're very entertaining.
That's right. Okay. Speaking of entertaining, let's go to the other side of this and
let's end the podcast now.
End it right now because this ain't going to be entertaining.
This was the fulfillment of the podcast, was me starting to watch the Braves game, which will be a nice segue.
So today's question comes to us anonymously. Here we go. I'm taking a Bible class. Great job. Good for you. I'm taking a Bible class, and they have been going over how they believe the New Testament backs up the requirement of capital punishment as originally stated in the Old Testament. What are your opinions on this? As it does not sound like Jesus to me. I love the fact that you ended your question with that because you know how much we love to filter all things through Jesus. Right. And so you're looking at this from that perspective, looking through the lens of does this look like Jesus? And I love the fact that you're doing that. So good job. Glad you're taking a Bible class. Hope you're learning a lot.
And I would just say, I think you're right. It does not sound like Jesus.
It does not.
It sounds like the person who is teaching the class really likes capital punishment. Which means they've never had it applied to them.
I was going to say, I hope they don't like it.
It just
didn't want anybody to
and
like
particularly, I had not caught this when pre this recording. I didn't catch you said as applied the Old Testament. Well, capital punishment, the Old Testament applied for lots of things. Got a kid like our previous podcast who don't believe, dead.
Take them out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean
That's how we keep the faith pure, kill everybody that don't agree with it.
adulterers were taken out. Disobedient children were taken out. Lots of things.
And I bet the person teaching the Bible class would not say, I
Those
think
things,
all
yeah.
of those things should also be covered,
Probably
which means
not.
they are also reading their scripture in a non-literal way.
Mhm.
And I said when we read this pre-podcast, I cannot think of a New Testament verse, which doesn't mean it's not there, that either says anything about capital punishment for or against. I don't think it's there. But so I'm open to someone sending that in and saying, how about this one?
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think there's a verse where Jesus speaks directly to capital punishment.
Well, because
I mean, there is the passage where they tried to get him to condone the stoning of the woman caught in adultery. And he kind of don't go with that.
He says, let the one without sin.
I mean,
so that was a form of, that's their form of capital punishment.
Form of it.
But even capital punishment, I think, maybe not by definition, but certainly by the way it's talked about, is a state.
Yes.
A state taking
By the government.
life.
The government
By the
doing it.
government.
Which is the Old Testament. The Old Testament.
No, I get that.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
That's one way of doing it. So that's the primary way people are talking about it, is a nation state being able to take the life of one of its citizens for some reason in particular, usually some criminal offense that has taken place. And so I think the bigger question when you talk about does it sound like Jesus and does the New Testament condone it was the purpose of what the New Testament law was doing, or the New Testament commands or the teachings of Jesus, was to teach us how to run a nation state. Because that'd be the only way it would kind of apply to capital punishment. There is a place where Jesus refers to the Old Testament command of, you have heard it said, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. And he says, but I tell you to love your neighbor. Love your enemies, right? He says, I tell you to love your enemies, bless those who curse you, pray for those who persecute you. So that's in his Sermon on the Mount.
But even that, as you just said, that's not him saying, okay, when you go to set up a nation, here are the laws you should have.
Yeah.
He was not creating a new government or law.
Right. The idea, and so the question is, what is Jesus and what are the New Testament writers trying to do? By and large, I would say the Sermon on the Mount in particular, and then the New Testament writings that follow, epistles and such, so the writings of Paul, the writings of James and Peter, they are designed, I do think, to create a new kind of society, but not necessarily a new kind of nation state. A new kind of, and by society, I mean
people.
Yes, a people, a social organization, a group of people.
An assembly.
I think the old British evangelical John Stott referred to it as a new politic.
With the K.
With a K, yes, but not
with a K.
But not politics in the sense that we mean, which is how to govern a nation state that has a military and a borders and these kinds of things.
That's right.
A way of organizing people, which we would refer to as the church. That would be his gathering, right? The ecclesia, the gathering of people. How do they organize themselves? How do they, let me think of a better
What
way.
is their ethic?
What is their ethic? How do
they live?
How do I form a kind of people who, in particular, the Sermon on the Mount becomes the natural way that they live? Which there are many Old Testament scholars. Walter Brueggemann fits under this. I was just telling them Dr. Carmen Imes, who would fit under this, would say
she's great.
That was the purpose of the Old Testament law as well. Is that, and I'll give just an example of this. The 10 Commandments, which everyone wants to post right now in
courthouses, schools and stuff,
were not entirely enforceable. Certainly, do not murder is, do not commit adultery, because I can tell whether you slept with someone. How do I know if you're coveting your neighbor's stuff? How do I know if you've coveted your neighbor's wife, or even if you've held? Those are things that are happening internal. And her point is, the point of the law is God saying, this is how you become a kind of people. This is how you organize yourself as a kind of people. These are the social expectations you should uphold. So you become the kind of people who could love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. And what Jesus comes to do when he says, you've heard it said, eye for eye, tooth for a tooth. He's saying the natural fulfillment of that is to love your enemy, which we hear and go, how is that possible? Well, that's because eye for eye, tooth for a tooth was a restriction. Mm-hmm. It was not a, hey, you don't want to take things out on people who.
Well, because the natural thing when somebody hurts me is not to get even. Nobody really wants to get even. I want to get ahead.
Yeah.
Yes. And in ancient cultures, because once again, I'm with a group right now that's been reading through the laws in Leviticus, and sometimes you sit and you go, oh my Lord, all these are just so tedious. They have all these different things. But what you actually see is the tediousness of them. If you actually sit and go, okay, if I was a person who lived under this, how would I actually go about this? What you actually realize is God is restricting it so much that you eventually go, it's not worth it. Mm-hmm. It's not worth it. In fact, the ones that people really want to hold up, that the Old Testament says it's good to own slaves, you look at all those slavery laws, what you actually get to is no one could actually own slaves. Right. If you followed all of these laws, it would be impossible for you to actually own a slave.
Well, you had to release them at a certain point anyway.
Well, and you can't buy them
right.
or sell them or trade them. So how are you getting them?
Right.
So you look into all of these things and you go, how does any of these things actually operate? So when you look at eye for eye, tooth for a tooth, in ancient culture, if I had more power than you and you slapped me on the cheek, I come and I destroy your family.
That's right.
I come and I take your children as slaves. I come and burn.
You kill my son, I kill everybody in your family.
Yes, I burn down your whole village. Mm-hmm. And so when God says, hey, no, you can only, they cut your eye, they damage your eye, you don't get to kill them. You can only take their eye. Which then at that point you go, well, why am I taking their eye? How does that actually benefit me to take their eye? If it's a tooth, if they knock out a tooth, the best you can do is take out a tooth. And
I'd be very interested in why the Bible teacher, I guess to get beyond I didn't mean to interrupt you. I'm sorry for doing that.
No,
I'm trying to figure out why a Bible teacher wants to convince you that capital punishment is backed up by the New Testament. Mm-hmm. I mean, if this is an American Bible teacher, do they not think we're killing enough people? Are they trying to say,
or are we assuaging our conscience?
Yeah, I don't understand.
Because Ed, you made the point before we recorded that we have a system of capital punishment in our, but we know for a fact it is unjust.
Yeah, we find out
we execute way more minorities than we should.
Than the population,
population. We execute more. If we execute one innocent person, we've done too many, and we know we have.
Well, and because of the ways our laws are written, there are things that you can find out that I'm innocent, but because I've exhausted appeals, they can't even hear that.
That's right.
So I can find out that I'm innocent, and it takes incredible amounts of, you can still, maybe capital punishment would work in a perfect world where there was a perfectly just place. If God were in command, which is what Israel was supposed to have, and they were supposed to bring things before God, there was to be no king. It was not a libertarian society where I just get the rules and then I go and operate on them by myself. It was a community. Maybe if God were literally the final judge, you could have a just kind of place and people would carry it out. But that place doesn't exist. I would just be interested in why a person representing Jesus would want to push that the New Testament supports. It just comes back to, I'm wondering what his motivation is, or her motivation, whoever it is that's teaching this class.
Yeah.
So if we get to, so what is it you want us to do about that?
That's right.
I mean,
how does that
how does that knowledge help me carry out the other commands of Jesus, which seem to involve loving God and loving people? I mean, I get that there's a desire for justice, and when people have capital things happen to them terribly, there's a demand for justice. I get that.
Yeah.
justice is really hard to come by in this world.
Mhm.
Um,
Well, and once again, I think when you look at that, I think the question you should be asking is what does God see as just, and what does God see, as right in these situations? And we tend to think of justice in terms of like fairness. So like eye for eye, tooth for tooth sounds primarily like, well, that's what justice is. In every situation, it's that if something bad happens, everything's back to equal. Everything's back to fair. But Jesus seems to think it's just as just to love your enemies
Mhm.
and to bless those who curse you and to pray for those who persecute you. And so when you ask about what justice is, I can't remember which person I heard say this, but it might be John Perkins, I heard said this, is that justice is returning things to the way God intended them to be. So in a sense where I've wronged someone, God intended me never to have wronged that person, right? And so the job that I have to get myself into is I have to creatively and imaginably go, how do I get to a place where we haven't wronged each other?
well, and in a situation
Well-
where there's a capital offense, which is generally murder, or
Sure.
there's no way for me to bring a life back.
Nope.
That's right.
That's right.
And we have found out, particularly in our generation, where there has been continual war for the first time in American history, the amount of damage we have done to young people to send them off to kill people, that
Mhm.
taking a life is not a neutral thing,
Mm-mm.
even if you felt like you had to do it.
Mhm.
It does not take it is not neutral impact on a person,
On the killer,
person who is
killing.
taking the life.
Yep.
So then there's a wound that has happened in their soul that will have to be healed. So now
Mhm.
I have a justice issue with them as well.
Mhm.
I have to believe if the New Testament, if what Jesus had in mind by coming, what God had in mind, what the Trinity has in mind, is to reestablish the world that God originally intended, and if the church is the way to work that out, then in the beginning, when God made humans, He did not think, and what will we do when they kill each other? Because He did not think we would kill. He was not planning on creating a community where we would follow Him and we would kill each other.
Mhm.
So the job of Christians is not to try to, we are to be creating the new world order. And I know that's a bad loaded word for a lot of people politically, but that's literally what Jesus and the church is creating.
Yeah.
We are creating the kingdom of God on earth as it is in heaven. And we aren't supposed to be dealing with what happens when this doesn't happen. There are governments that unfortunately are going to handle that justly or unjustly.
Mostly unjustly.
Mostly because they're humans involved.
That's right.
And they're mostly people who want to be in positions of power in that aren't asking God what God would have them do.
Well, and if you are truly seeking justice, you come to the place, you have to eventually come to the place where you understand enough about yourself to know that I can't carry it out. No matter how fair, whatever I'm working towards, I do not have the ability to know and understand and carry out what justice truly looks like. So now we're back to the Jesus ethic. So now I release that. It's not my job.
Vengeance is God's,
Ju-
not mine.
Yeah, and so when it comes to justice, when it comes to vengeance, whatever you want out of this situation, you don't have the ability to do it. So you must turn that over to the care of the one who can. And that's when you release it. I think that's what Jesus is getting at.
And I think it takes a lot of creativity and imagination. It has to come from people who have been formed so much in the image of Jesus himself that they can creatively and imaginatively find out, what would I do if God was in this if Jesus was in this bad situation? I said recently to a group of people, and we were talking about a specific situation, a person that I know, they had been engaged in some unChrist-like behavior with other people that they honestly were trying to witness to. They were trying to be an influence for them, but they admitted they had talked badly about someone else and they were just in a bad situation. And the person they had talked about found out about it. And they said, and I'm trying to just handle it. What would Jesus do? And I said, the hard part in this situation, I said, but can be done, is Jesus wouldn't be in this situation because Jesus wouldn't have done the first thing.
Nope.
So what you now have to do is go, you have to creatively and imaginatively go. If Jesus got dropped into the midst of a messy situation that he would have never created, because I created the mess, what would he do in this situation? Well, that takes a lot of creativity and imagination. What does Jesus do in a situation where someone has murdered his son, has murdered someone he loves? Well, as far as we can tell from the Gospels, that's not precisely a situation Jesus was in. So what does a Jesus-like person do in this messy situation?
And there may not be a one-size-fits-all answer.
That's what I mean. It takes creativity. It takes imagination. It takes sitting in the situation and saying, if what God always intended, so this is what we got to in this history. If what God always intended was, I never spoke ill of this person, which isn't what he intended. What he intended wasn't necessarily that he doesn't intend things in the negative. What he intended was us to live in such an honest and loving relationship that gossip wouldn't enter into my mind.
Right.
So now I have to go, not how do I get to a place where no one ever gossiped? It's how do I get to a place where we're loving and honest with one another? God doesn't just sit and think, I never intend for anyone ever to be murdered. He sits and thinks, I exist for people to exist in a place.
Well, it's even a different situation, Nathan, I think. If I have wrongly hurt Jason and I want to represent Jesus well, I know what the right thing is. The right thing is for me to love Jason, which in that place, since I have put him in a one-down position by harming him, my thing would be to say, first, I own it. I just own it.
That's right.
And I say, what would you like for me to do? Because I want with all my heart to bring you back to where you and I can be back on hold. And I don't get to determine, but that's a different situation than capital punishment is the person who's wronged is gone.
Mm.
But
well, I mean, I know there are other people involved.
Yeah.
I know that.
Other
I know
people
that.
hurt. Yeah, I get what you're saying.
But nobody is saying, including the Bible, that the family gets to determine what happens to the person. That's why the Old Testament laws are set up. That's why the city of refuges are set up, so that families don't get to run down the murder.
That's right. That's right.
There's going to be another system. So now I'm not the person that's wrong. I can't make the person who killed somebody come to Jason and say, man, I'm so sorry for killing whoever I killed that you loved. Mm-hmm. I can't make that happen because that's a heart thing. Mm-hmm. This question, it's not even operating. It's why I go back to what is the reason this Bible teacher is trying to get me to accept that the New Testament is for capital punishment. Mm-hmm. Because it's not clearly stated.
No.
Well, and like we said at the very beginning, the New Testament wasn't written for that purpose.
That's right.
No, that's right.
It's not there to create a system or government to justify anything. It's trying to create a people,
mm-hmm.
a group of people that look and reflect the image of God into the world as seen clearly in Jesus Christ. And so when you bring questions like this to the New Testament, that's why I said earlier, that's why two people can come to the same New Testament with different assumptions and different agendas and sometimes come away with exactly the opposite.
Because they come back with what they went in with.
Yeah, because they're asking a question of a set of writings that those writings never set out to answer.
Mm-hmm.
They did not intend for us to use this as a guidebook, rule book, law book to create these kinds of systems.
Yeah, it's like asking the U.S. Constitution, how should the people of Argentina handle a situation? Yeah. Well, the U.S. Constitution doesn't say anything about Argentina.
It's not what the purpose of it is.
It's not relevant.
That's right. So, yeah, I would just, like Ed, I would have an issue with what this teacher is trying to do with the New Testament, because I don't think that's what it's for.
It feels like I I have a personal decision that capital punishment is the right way to handle certain things.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I also want to follow Jesus and believe that Jesus would hold the same opinion that I have.
Yeah.
hmm
But there's no way for me to, unless and I guess all three of us are on the same page, we can't think of a place where Jesus says capital punishment should be applied, nor that any
Well,
of
and
the
even-
apostles.
And even if you go back to the example I used earlier, John chapter 8, where the woman caught in adultery comes to him, even then, Jesus doesn't really answer the question.
No.
When they say, hey, law says we stone her, what do you say? And he, first of all, he takes a lot of time and he reflects. But then he goes back to what you were saying, Nathan, is he's saying, okay, I see what you're looking for. So search within yourself.
Right.
Are you the type of person that could throw a stone at a
Justly,
woman?
you can
Who
justly.
could justly do it. She did right. She did what was wrong. And the law does say, yes, to stone her. So are you the type of person that can pick up that rock
Mhm.
and hit her in the head with it? And they all walked away.
Yeah,
Yeah.
starting with the oldest, which
That's
means
right.
they knew, oh, he got us.
That's
Mhm.
right. Or that
They
this
reflected
is not the kind of person that I'd want to
to
be.
be. That's right.
Yeah.
And
Or
Which-
the kind of person that God has been forming me to be. I am not the
Yeah.
kind of person.
Yeah.
I know myself well enough to know, no, I can't justly condemn this person to death.
because if Jesus wanted to, he could have in that moment said, hey, capital punishment is wrong.
Right.
It's off the
Mhm.
table. It should. But again, he's not trying to answer that question
hmm
because that's not what he's concerned with.
hmm
So.
Yeah, I think that's a good illustration. I think the idea of becoming the kind of people who, in unique and difficult circumstances, can creatively imagine what would be a loving Jesus-like response in this. I think it is critical to following Jesus in this world. I think there are just as much on the other side of anti-capital punishment people who would come to equally un-Jesus-like decisions around passivity. And I don't get into pacifism, but passivity around things that I think, because we just go, well, that's not our thing, so we got to go. We can't just think in the negative on things.
No,
We
that's right.
cannot just make negative presuppositions about things. We have to become people who would go, there is a way for Jesus to step into the middle of these things, to be the same Jesus who says to a woman who's caught in adultery, go and sin no more. I don't condemn you.
Okay.
And then to look at entire cities and say, it's going to be better for the city of Nineveh than it will be for you. It's going to be so bad for you when the time comes. There is a God who sits in both of those places. And to be able to creatively imagine, so what does that mean that I should live and how I should interact with people? That becomes, I think, critical. That's what, unfortunately, the Pharisees didn't have but Jesus did. Jesus was so formed by his knowledge of God and his knowledge of the scriptures that he was able to lovingly, creatively interact with God and people in such a way that when people heard him speak, they said, he has authority.
Mhm.
There is something about the way he's speaking. And I think what they mean by authority is not, look at all the power. It resonates with
That's
me.
right. That's what I
As soon
think
as
too.
he
Yep,
said
yep.
it, I go, that's right.
Yeah.
I think that's
That
right.
is the way that should go.
Mhm.
And so that'd be my question to the Bible teacher. The same thing you would say is, okay, not only what is your motivation, what's the so what for me out of this?
Mhm.
Is because I think Christians just passing it off to the government and going, they're going to do what they're going to do.
Mhm.
I don't know that that's necessarily
No,
where we sit either.
No, I think if you think there's anyway, that's beyond the scope of this question.
Yeah.
I don't want to get into all of that. It's just beyond the scope of this.
Mhm.
This question is: do we think Jesus? It doesn't sound like Jesus. You're right. It doesn't sound like Jesus to me either. I wonder. I don't want to cast. I don't know the person. I don't know why, but I just can't imagine how in teaching a Bible course, unless they're at one of these Old Testament passages that's about capital punishment. And then they go, oh, and it's also taught in the New Testament.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
I don't know how that came up.
So if you want to tell us,
Yeah,
Mhm.
let us know. What
shoot.
what was the context
Yeah.
of that?
Start a conversation. I would love to have that conversation with you or whoever came up with that. So, all right. So, like I said, I make no promises about next week because we're still waiting for our next question.
Yep.
So, click that link, send it to us, and you very well might create another episode. Episode 260.
Okay.
That will be when we show up next. It could be next week. It could be next month. It could be never. We never know. But either way, we will maybe see you next time. See you then. Bye.
Bye.